She married a quiet human until he drew his sword and split the heavens. Part 1. The ceremony no one took seriously. The Great Hall of Verith Prime had seen many things in its long history: wars declared, treaties signed, kings crowned and buried, but the Verity nobles who filled its golden seats that morning were not thinking about history. They were thinking about the human standing at the far end of the ceremonial floor, and how remarkably plain he looked. Cole Harper stood straight and still in his formal attire, a simple dark suit, no medals, no decorations, nothing that marked him as anything more than a junior envoy from a species the galaxy had mostly ignored for the past century. He was not tall by Verity standards. He was not broad or fierce-looking. He had short brown hair, calm brown eyes, and the kind of face that people tended to forget 5 minutes after looking at it. He smiled politely at the crowd. The crowd smiled back the way people smile at something harmless, warm, a little condescending, not really paying attention. Lady Serena Voss stood on the other side of the ceremonial floor and watched him the way she watched everything, carefully, quietly, with more patience than most people gave her credit for. She was the youngest daughter of High Consul Aldrich Voss, which meant she had grown up in rooms full of people performing strength. She knew what a warrior looked like when he was trying to appear relaxed. She knew what a diplomat looked like when he was afraid. She was not entirely sure what Cole Harper looked like. That was unusual enough to make her pay attention. The arrangement had been her father's idea. The Verity Dominion needed a smoother relationship with the human Terran Assembly, not because humans were powerful, but because their trade routes ran through 3 systems that Verith Prime needed access to. A marriage between a Voss daughter and a human representative would serve as a living symbol of goodwill. Serena had been told this in a meeting that lasted less than 10 minutes. She had not been asked her opinion. She had given it anyway, in the form of a single question: who is he? Her father had told her Cole was a former soldier turned diplomatic attaché, well regarded by his government, trustworthy and appropriate. She had looked at the single page of background information she was given and noted that most of it was blank. The ceremony itself was long by human standards but short by Verity ones. There were chants, an exchange of formal declarations, the binding of hands with a silver cord that symbolized the joining of 2 houses. Cole followed every step correctly. He had clearly studied the ritual. He did not stumble over any of the old Verity phrases, though his accent was gentle enough that a few of the elder nobles leaned toward each other and hid smiles behind their hands. Serena heard one of them murmur that he was like a pet learning to speak, well-meaning but soft. She did not react. She kept her eyes on Cole. He did not seem embarrassed. He did not seem nervous. When the silver cord was tied around both their wrists, he looked down at it for a moment and then looked up at Serena with an expression that was quiet and direct and not unkind. She had expected nervousness or pride or the stiff blankness of someone performing a duty they resented. She found none of those things. She found something she could not name, which bothered her more than any of the other options would have. After the ceremony, during the reception, Cole moved through the hall with easy, unhurried steps. He greeted every servant who crossed his path by looking them in the eye and nodding. He asked the name of the elderly attendant who poured his drink and thanked her by name when she answered. He spent a long time speaking with a group of young Verity scholars near the eastern window, asking questions about their research with what appeared to be genuine curiosity. Serena's brother Darian drifted past him twice, looking for a reaction. Darian was taller than Cole by half a head and had a habit of standing close to people he wanted to unsettle. Cole simply shifted slightly to the side each time, smiled, and kept talking to whoever he was talking to. Lord Varen, one of the oldest members of the High Consul's court, appeared at Serena's side during the 3rd hour of the reception. He watched Cole for a moment with the detached interest of a man inspecting something he had already classified. "He is quiet," Varen said. "Yes," Serena said. "Humans tend to be loud," Varen said. "They talk too much. They move too much. This one is different." "Different how?" Serena asked. Varen considered this. "Trained, perhaps. Diplomatic training can produce a kind of stillness. Or perhaps he is simply timid and has learned to make stillness look like a choice." He smiled at her. "Either way, you should have no trouble managing him. He seems agreeable." Serena said nothing. She was watching Cole's hands as he gestured while speaking, not wide, dramatic gestures, but small and precise ones. Each movement said exactly what it needed to say and nothing more. She did not know many people who moved like that. The ones she did know had not learned it from diplomatic training. At the end of the evening, when the last of the guests had made their way toward the transport platforms and the great hall was finally quiet, Cole walked to where Serena was standing near the tall windows that overlooked the capital. He stood beside her and looked out at the city lights spreading across the dark plain below. For a moment neither of them said anything. The silence was not uncomfortable, which surprised her. "It is a good city," Cole said. "It is my home," she said. "That makes it better," he said simply. She looked at him sideways. He was still watching the lights. "You are not what I expected," she said. He glanced at her. "What did you expect?" She thought about it honestly. "Someone performing," she said. He nodded slightly, as if that was a reasonable answer. "I stopped doing that a long time ago," he said. "It takes too much energy and it doesn't help anyone." She wanted to ask what he meant by that. She wanted to ask a lot of things. But she had grown up in a house where patience was a weapon sharper than any blade, and she knew that some information came only to people who were willing to wait for it. "Are you hungry?" Cole asked. She almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so completely ordinary, and she had not expected ordinary from him. She had not expected anything from him. And somehow that had already turned out to be wrong. "Yes," she said. "Then let's find something," he said, and turned toward the far corridor with the same unhurried step he had used all evening. Serena followed him. Behind them, the great hall sat empty and golden and full of the opinions of people who had already decided what Cole Harper was. Not one of them had thought to watch his hands. Not one of them had noticed the way he placed himself, quietly and without announcement, between Serena and the door each time a group of strangers passed too close. Serena had noticed. She filed it away in the careful, patient part of her mind where she kept the things that mattered, and said nothing, and waited. She married a quiet human until he drew his sword and split the heavens. Part 2, A Husband Made of Stillness. The first thing Serena learned about Cole in the weeks after their marriage was that he did not sleep late. She discovered this by accident on the fourth morning, when she woke earlier than usual and found his side of the bed already empty and cold. She assumed he had gone to the reading room. She went back to sleep. On the fifth morning she woke again at the same hour and found the same thing. On the sixth morning she got up and followed the sound of movement to the eastern courtyard. He was already there. The sky above Verith Prime was still dark at the edges, the twin moons low and pale near the horizon, and Cole was moving through something in the center of the open stone courtyard that did not look like any training form Serena had ever seen. It was not the bold, sweeping movements of Verity combat discipline. It was not the rigid, mechanical patterns she had seen in recordings of other species' martial traditions. It was slow. Deeply slow, in the way that a drawn bowstring is slow, full of something held back and controlled. Each movement flowed into the next with a patience that seemed almost deliberate in its quietness. His breathing was even and low. His eyes were open but distant. He moved like a man who had done this 10,000 times and had decided, somewhere along the way, that there was no reason to do it any differently. Serena watched from the archway for several minutes before she turned and went back inside. She did not ask him about it at breakfast. She watched his hands instead, the way they held his cup, the way they turned the page of the report he was reading. Steady. Always steady. The court did not know what to do with Cole Harper. He was polite to everyone, from the High Consul's senior advisors down to the groundskeepers who tended the palace gardens. He asked good questions at the diplomatic briefings he was permitted to attend, the kind of questions that made people think rather than the kind that showed off. He never argued loudly. He never demanded anything. He sent thoughtful notes of thanks when people helped him navigate Verity customs he was still learning. The senior advisors found him pleasant and forgettable. The younger nobles found him boring. Serena's brother Darian found him irritating in a way he could not fully explain. Darian was the High Consul's eldest son and the heir to the Voss name, and he had the temperament of a man who had been told his whole life that his opinion was the most important one in any room he entered. He did not like Cole. He did not like the way Cole looked at things, calm and even, never flinching, never trying to impress. Darian was used to being the kind of person that other people adjusted themselves around. Cole did not adjust. He simply existed in his own quiet way, and somehow that was more aggravating than any direct challenge could have been. 3 weeks after the wedding, Darien challenged Cole to a public sparring match during a formal dinner attended by most of the court. He framed it as friendly, a chance for the human to learn a little Verity combat tradition, nothing serious. Half the room leaned forward. Serena went still. Cole looked at Darien for a moment with the same calm, even expression he used for everything. Then he smiled and said that he appreciated the offer but he was not much of a performer, and that Darien's form was probably far better than anything he could show in return, so he would not want to waste the court's time. He then picked up the bottle of wine nearest to him and offered Darien a pour, as naturally as if the challenge had been a simple question about the weather. The room did not know where to look. Darien accepted the wine because refusing it at that point would have looked strange. He sat back down. 3 of the older nobles at the far end of the table turned away to hide expressions that might have been amusement. Serena watched Cole refill Darien's cup and ask him a genuine question about a recent border survey, which Darien answered stiffly and then found himself actually discussing, because the question had been specific and well-informed. Later that night Serena found Cole reading in the small study adjacent to their rooms. She sat down across from him and watched him until he looked up. "He wanted to embarrass you," she said. "Yes," Cole said. "You let him think he succeeded," she said. Cole considered this. "I let him feel like the room was still his," he said. "That costs me nothing. And it means tomorrow he is not angry at me, which makes everything easier." He paused. "Angry people make bad decisions. I would rather he make good ones." Serena studied his face. "You have done this before," she said. "Managed people like that?" "For a long time," Cole said. She asked the question she had been holding since the first morning she had watched him in the courtyard. "What were you before you came here?" He looked at her steadily. "A soldier," he said. "How long?" He was quiet for a beat. "Long enough that I stopped counting," he said. She looked at the side of his collar where she knew the scars ran. She had seen them on the 4th evening, when he had not realized she was standing in the doorway of the dressing room. Long and pale and numerous, the kind left not by accidents but by decisions. She did not ask about them. She asked something else instead. "Do you miss it?" He thought about that honestly. "Parts of it," he said. "The clarity. When something matters and you know it matters and there is nothing in between you and the thing that needs doing." He looked down at his book. "The rest of it I do not miss." She nodded slowly and let the conversation settle. A week after that conversation, the first diplomatic reports arrived through the High Consul's intelligence office, scattered and unverified, flagged as low priority. Kareth Dominion warships had been seen in the outer edge of Verity space, running without identification signals. The report estimated the movements as routine patrol activity and recommended monitoring. The High Consul read it at a morning briefing and set it aside. Cole read the same report that afternoon in the secondary briefing room, where attaches and diplomatic staff reviewed the day's communications. He read it twice. He did not say anything. He folded the report carefully and set it on the table and then sat very still for a moment with his hands flat on the surface, looking at the wall. Serena was passing the open doorway and glanced in and saw him sitting like that. She had seen him still before, the courtyard, the study, the dinner where Darien had tried to make him small. This stillness was different. It was not peaceful. It was the stillness of a man standing very quietly inside something he already understood and did not like. She filed that too. In the careful place. And she waited. She married a quiet human until he drew his sword and split the heavens. Part 3, the night the Dominion came. There was no warning. That was the part the Verity military command would struggle to explain for months afterward, not because the attack was quiet, but because by the time anyone understood what was happening, it had already been happening for several minutes. The first strike hit the upper atmosphere relay towers at the edge of the capital district. The explosion was distant enough that the palace felt it as a low shudder through the floor, the kind of tremor that could have been weather or a deep geological shift or nothing at all. The second strike was closer. The third was not distant at all. Serena was in the upper gallery of the palace's east wing when the alarms began, not the slow, procedural alarms used for drills, but the rapid double pulse that meant the threat was real and already inside the system. She moved immediately toward the inner corridor, because she had grown up in a house where threat protocols were memorized alongside table manners. She did not run. She moved fast and low and kept to the walls, the way she had been taught. She almost walked into Cole in the hallway. He was already there, already moving toward her, and he had something in his hand that she could not immediately identify, a small, flat communication device, not standard Verity issue, something she had never seen before. He was speaking into it in a low, clipped voice using a language she did not know. He closed the channel when he saw her and took her arm without breaking stride. "Inner sanctuary," he said. "Now." "What is happening?" she said. "Kareth," he said. "Ground forces already inside the outer wall." She looked at him. "That is not possible. The outer wall has 7 security layers." "6, he said. "The 7th went dark 11 minutes ago. That is why no one detected the breach immediately." He was steering her firmly down the corridor without looking at her, his eyes moving over every doorway and junction they passed. Someone inside the system disabled it. The inner sanctuary was a large fortified chamber 3 levels below the main hall, built during a war that had ended before Serena was born. By the time they reached it, a dozen members of the court were already inside, 2 senior advisors, several younger nobles, a pair of palace attendants, and 4 Verity royal guards stationed at the sealed entrance. The guards were armored and armed and looked like men who were trying hard not to appear as frightened as they felt. The reports coming through the palace communication system were fragmented and contradictory, but the word Kareth appeared in enough of them to silence even the loudest of the assembled nobles. Cole moved to the wall beside the entrance and stood with his back against it. He was still holding the small communication device. He looked at the sealed door, then at the ceiling, then at the 2 ventilation shafts on the far wall. Serena watched him do all of this and understood, from the speed and order of it, that he was not looking at the room the way the others were. He was not looking for safety. He was looking for what would be used against them. "The door will not hold long against a Kareth breach charge," he said quietly, to no one in particular. One of the senior advisors turned sharply. "The door is rated for military-grade assault. Kareth breach charges exceed that rating," Cole said, without urgency, without arguing. "Just the fact, delivered flat and clean." The advisor opened his mouth to respond. He did not get the chance. The door shuttered. Then it shuttered again, harder, the seal along the top edge glowing briefly orange where the charge made contact. The 4 royal guards raised their weapons. 2 of the nobles pressed back against the far wall. One of the attendants made a sound that she immediately swallowed. The door came open on the 4th charge. Kareth ground soldiers moved in fast and organized, 4 entered ahead, 2 held the threshold, weapons up and tracking. They wore close-fitted dark combat armor with no visible insignia, and they moved with the specific, efficient confidence of a unit that had done this many times before. Their weapons were aimed at the center of the room. One of them said something in Kareth that did not need translation. The Verity guards raised their own weapons. For a half-second the room was a held breath. Cole stepped forward. He did not shout. He did not announce himself. He simply moved, 1 clean step out from the wall, and his right hand came up from beneath his jacket and the blade was already in it, already drawn, as if it had never not been there. It was dark and long, not curved like Verity steel, not ceremonial in any way. It was a working weapon, old and maintained with the care of something that had earned its place in the world. He held it low and forward and still, the way the weapon was meant to be held, the way a person holds something they do not need to think about. The Kareth soldiers hesitated. That was the first thing that registered as wrong to every person watching, because Kareth soldiers did not hesitate. They were trained specifically not to. But something about the way Cole stood, the angle of the blade, the complete absence of performance in his posture, the fact that he did not look afraid or angry but simply ready, produced a half-second of recalibration in soldiers who had been taught to read threats. Cole used the half-second. He was fast in a way that did not look fast, if that was possible, the way a river looks slow from far away and then you are in it and it is not slow at all. He moved through the nearest soldier before the weapon could fully track, inside the angle of fire, close enough that the Kareth technique for this distance was useless. Then the second soldier. Then the third. He did not do anything dramatic. He did not make it look like a performance. He simply removed each threat the shortest way available to him, and the room followed his path with expressions that shifted from terror to something that had no immediate name. The 4 soldiers who had entered were no longer standing. The 2 at the threshold were looking at Cole across 3 meters of distance and doing something Serena would not have believed possible before tonight, hesitating again. One of them made a decision and lunged. Cole moved left, let the weapon pass, and answered the question the soldier had asked with the blade. Then it was quiet. Cole stood in the center of the room and breathed in once, slowly, and looked at what was around him. He turned to the Verity guards, who were staring at him with the blank, flat expression of men whose understanding of the world had just been revised at high speed. "Seal the ventilation shafts," he said. "There will be a second team in 4 minutes." Nobody moved. He looked at them with the same calm, even expression he used for everything. "For minutes," he said again, gently. "Please." The guards moved. Serena stood against the far wall and looked at her husband and did not say anything. Her hands were steady. She was her father's daughter, and she had been raised not to come apart in the moments that mattered. But she was looking at Cole Harper, plain, polite, forgettable Cole, and the blade in his hand, and the absolute absence of hesitation in him, and she was very quietly revising everything she thought she had been patient enough to figure out. She had not even been close. She married a quiet human until he drew his sword and split the heavens. Part 4, What a Quiet Man Carries. The second Kareth team came at the 3-minute and 50-second mark. Cole had the ventilation shafts sealed and 2 of the Verity guards repositioned before they arrived. The team came through the main corridor this time, 5 soldiers, better armed than the first group, and moving in a tighter formation. They had clearly been told about the inner sanctuary and had adjusted their approach. Cole was already at the door when they reached it. He did not wait inside. He went out to meet them. Serena heard it from inside the chamber, not screaming, not the sharp chaos she would have expected from a fight, but something deliberate and short and then quiet. 3 minutes. Then Cole's footsteps returning down the corridor, even and unhurried. He came through the door and checked over his shoulder once before pulling it most of the way shut behind him. He wiped the blade on a cloth he had taken from somewhere and looked at the room. The nobles were still pressed against the far wall. The guards were watching him with an expression that had moved past shock into something more complicated. The senior advisors were not speaking, which was unusual, because Serena had never in her life seen either of them without something to say. Cole crossed to the room's secondary communication panel and began working through it with the ease of someone who had done it before. He bypassed 2 of the standard Verity security layers with a sequence that he clearly knew from memory, and opened a narrow channel on a frequency Serena did not recognize. He spoke into it briefly. 6 words in the same language she had heard him use in the corridor. Then he listened. A single tone sounded back, not a voice, just a tone, and his shoulders dropped almost imperceptibly, a fraction of the tension he had been carrying releasing all at once. He closed the channel. "What was that?" Serena asked. He looked at her. "A check-in," he said. "To confirm the inner wing is clear." "To who?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. "People I work with," he said. "People who are in the system." She held his eyes. "In the system," she said slowly. "In Verity space." "Yes." The senior advisor who had been silent until now, Lord Fenner, the longest-serving member of the High Consul's Council, took a short step forward. "Who authorized a human military presence in Verity space?" His voice was controlled but thin at the edges. Cole looked at him the way he looked at most things, without anger, without apology. "A treaty clause that was written into the diplomatic compact 3 years before my assignment here," he said. Article 14, Subsection 9, Addendum C. A standing authorization for a quiet position escort in the event of a confirmed threat scenario. He paused. Most people who signed the compact did not read that far. Fenner stared at him. Cole held the look without difficulty. "You were never a diplomatic attaché," Fenner said. "I am a diplomatic attaché," Cole said. "It is not my only assignment." Fenner looked at the blade, which Cole had sheathed with the same simple efficiency he had drawn it, cleanly, without ceremony. "What rank?" Fenner asked. Cole considered the question for a moment with the particular stillness he used when he was deciding how much of an answer to give. "The rank I hold does not have a standard Verity equivalent," he said. It is not a rank that is publicized. The unit I belong to is not acknowledged in any official record. The operations it has been involved in are not on file. He looked at Fenner evenly. If it helps, the last time my unit was formally activated before this assignment, it was to end a conflict that your government's historians would classify as a border dispute but that my government would describe differently. Fenner did not ask for clarification. Something in Cole's tone made it clear that the clarification would not be comfortable. Outside, the sound of the Kareth assault was beginning to change, the sharp, organized quality of an advancing force giving way to something more scattered. From the small high window set into the sanctuary wall, the orange-white light of what appeared to be orbital fire was visible in the upper sky. Not Kareth fire. Something else. Something that had been in the system already, running silent, waiting. One of the younger guards found his voice. "Those are not Verity ships," he said, watching the sky. "No," Cole said. "Whose are they?" "Mine," Cole said simply. He moved to the door again and opened it fully. The corridor was clear and quiet. He looked back into the room, at Serena, at the guards, at the silent advisors and the pale-faced nobles who had pressed themselves against the back wall 2 hours ago and had not fully moved since. "The inner wing is clear," he said. "I need 4 of you to hold this corridor while I move to the eastern axis and coordinate from there. The Kareth ground forces in the outer sections are going to start pulling back in the next 10 minutes. When they do not pursue them, let them go. Cornered soldiers are more dangerous than retreating ones." He said it the way a person reads directions off a sign, plain, practical, completely without performance. The 4 Verity guards straightened. One of them had been in the royal service for 15 years and had never been given a combat order by anyone below the rank of general. He looked at Cole Harper and found, with some surprise, that he was already moving to comply before he had consciously decided to. Cole stepped into the corridor. Serena followed him. He glanced at her. "You should stay with the group," he said. "You need someone who knows the eastern access layout," she said. "I grew up in this palace." He looked at her for a beat. Then he nodded once and kept moving. She fell in beside him, matching his pace. "The ships," she said, keeping her voice low. "Yes," he said. "How long have they been there?" "Since before the wedding," he said. She absorbed this. "And the communication device you had in the corridor?" "Standard equipment for my secondary assignment," he said. "And the blade?" He almost smiled. "That one is just mine," he said. "I have carried it for a long time." They moved through the eastern passage quickly and without incident. Cole knew the route she had not told him, not from her, but from something else, from preparation that had happened before he ever set foot on Verith Prime. She watched him navigate a junction she had not mentioned and understood that this man had been doing his job since before the first morning she had seen him in the courtyard. He had been protecting her home from the moment he arrived. He had simply been quiet about it. At the Eastern Access Terminal, Cole opened the secured channel again and spent 4 minutes issuing clean, rapid instructions to whatever forces he was coordinating in the system above them. His voice did not rise. His hands did not shake. He spoke the way a person speaks when they have practiced being calm inside terrible things for long enough that calm is no longer an act, it is simply what they are. When he finished, he looked at Serena. She looked back at him without looking away. "You are going to have questions," he said. "Many," she said. "I will answer them," he said. "All of them. When this is finished." She nodded. Outside, through the high narrow windows of the eastern corridor, the orange light in the sky was fading. The Kareth ships were moving back. The ground forces, just as Cole had said they would, were beginning to pull away from the outer sections of the palace. Cole watched the sky for a moment. Then he exhaled once, quietly, and rolled his shoulders back, and turned to the next thing that needed doing. She watched him and thought about the plain men at the ceremony who had thanked the officiant and asked if she was hungry. She thought about the empty courtyard at dawn and the hands that were always steady and the single page of background information that was mostly blank. She thought she was beginning to understand why she married a quiet human until he drew his sword and split the heavens. Part 5, What the Galaxy Did Not Know About the Quiet Ones. By morning, the Kareth warships were gone from Verith Prime's upper atmosphere. They had not been destroyed, they had simply turned and moved away, back toward the outer edge of the system, and then beyond it into deep space. The ground forces that had breached the palace walls were either captured, gone with the ships, or still somewhere in the outer sections of the capital being dealt with by Verity military units that had finally rallied in the second half of the night. What had made the Kareth fleet withdraw was not the Verity response. The Verity command had been scrambling to organize itself for most of the attack, slowed by the breach of the relay towers and the disabled security layer that Cole had identified in the first minutes. What had turned the Kareth fleet was something else, something that appeared on the system's long-range sensors at the third hour of the attack, already positioned between the Kareth warships and the planet, running on systems that Verity sensor technology had trouble resolving clearly. A human vessel. One vessel, deep space class, dark and quiet and very specifically placed. It had not fired a single weapon. It had simply appeared, right where it was not supposed to be, right when it was needed, and transmitted one signal to the Kareth fleet command. Whatever that signal contained, the Kareth ships had begun their withdrawal within 8 minutes of receiving it. This was the thing High Consul Aldrich Voss was most interested in when he sat down across from Cole Harper in the war chamber the following afternoon. The chamber was smaller than the Great Hall and had none of its ceremony. The long table was surrounded by senior military officers and the surviving members of the High Consul's Council. Darian Voss sat at the far end with the particular expression of a man who had spent the night revising a very long list of assumptions. Serena sat beside Cole. She had not been asked to leave and had not offered to. The High Consul was a careful man. He had not built 30 years of political authority by reacting before he understood what he was reacting to. He looked at Cole Harper, plain, calm, the same man he had welcomed into his house 4 months ago as a formality, and folded his hands on the table. "The ship," he said. "Whose authorization placed it in Verity space?" "Mine," Cole said. "Your rank authorizes the deployment of deep space military assets." "Yes," Cole said. "That rank does not appear on any record we have been given by the Terran Assembly," the High Consul said. "No," Cole said. "It would not." The High Consul looked at him for a long moment. "I am going to ask you a direct question," he said, "and I would like a direct answer." "All right," Cole said. "How many soldiers like you exist?" Cole was quiet for a moment. Not hesitant, the way he was quiet when he was measuring his words for precision rather than avoidance. "Most humans are exactly what they look like," he said. "They are curious and warm and they talk more than necessary and they genuinely want things to go well. That is not an act. That is what we are, most of the time." He paused. "But humanity has been alive for a very long time. Longer than most of the species in this part of the galaxy realize. And in that time we have survived things that did not make it into the histories your scholars have access to, not because we hid them deliberately, but because we dealt with them and moved on and did not feel the need to build monuments to our own survival." He looked around the table slowly. "The people who were shaped by that survival, the ones who were trained to carry it, they are not a small number. But they are not visible. They go to ceremonies in plain clothes and ask if you are hungry and learn your customs and remember your names. They are very easy to overlook." He let that sit for a moment. "That has occasionally been useful." The chamber was very quiet. Lord Fenner, who had recovered some of his composure since the previous night, leaned forward. "You are telling us that humanity has a hidden military capacity." "I am telling you that humanity has people," Cole said. "People who are very good at being present without being noticed. And yes, when it is necessary, they are also very good at other things." He did not look at the blade at his side. He did not need to. The Kareth fleet did not leave because of firepower. They left because the ship in the system sent them a message, and the message told them who had been on the ground inside that palace all night, and what unit that person belonged to, and what the record of that unit was. He paused. The Kareth have encountered that unit before. In a conflict that neither our government nor theirs has formally acknowledged. They made a calculation about how much they were willing to spend on this operation, and they decided the number was less than what continuing would cost them. Darian Voss had not spoken since the meeting began. He spoke now, from the far end of the table, in a voice that was quieter than Serena had ever heard from him. "If your unit is that capable," he said, "why were you sent here as a diplomat?" Cole looked at him. For the first time in 4 months, Darian did not look for the joke in the answer, because it was clear there was not going to be one. Because I am also a diplomat, Cole said. Both things are true. And the best outcome, always, is the one where I never have to be anything other than the first one. He met Darian's eyes steadily. Last night was not the best outcome. It was a good outcome, because no one we were responsible for was lost. But the best outcome would have been the Kareth fleet never arriving at all. I would have preferred that. The meeting continued for 2 more hours. Questions were asked and answered. Plans were made for a formal joint communication with the Terran Assembly. The Verity Military Command requested a full debrief with Cole on Kareth deployment patterns, which he agreed to. Lord Fenner proposed a review of the diplomatic compact's fine print, which produced the first moment of dry humor in the room when Cole suggested that perhaps Addendum C was worth a second read. When the chamber finally cleared, Cole and Serena walked together through the long corridor that led back toward their wing of the palace. The morning light was gold and clean through the tall windows. The city below looked the same as it always had, steady, alive, ordinary in the way that cities look after surviving something they were not supposed to. Serena walked beside Cole without speaking for a while. She had spent the night watching him work and had spent the morning watching him answer for it, and she had not yet found the place where the 2 versions of him stopped making sense together. She was not sure they were 2 versions at all. You said you would answer my questions, she said. Yes, he said. All of them. All of them, he said. She thought about where to start. She thought about the courtyard at dawn and the blank page and the ceremony where the court had smiled behind their hands. She thought about the blade coming out from beneath his jacket in a room full of Kareth soldiers, and the way he had moved through them with the complete, quiet certainty of a man doing something he had been shaped by long years to do. Did you know this was going to happen? She asked. When you came here? He considered that honestly. I knew it was a possible outcome, he said. The Kareth had been watching Verity space for a long time. The diplomatic assignment put me in a position to be useful if it happened. And me, she asked. Were you assigned to protect me specifically? He was quiet for a moment. Initially, he said. That was part of the brief. She nodded slowly. And now? He looked at her. The plain, steady, honest look she had been seeing since the first night at the windows overlooking the city. Now it is not part of a brief, he said. She held that. She did not push it further. She had learned, in 4 months of being married to this man, that the things he said simply were what they were, no performance underneath, no calculation on top. He meant what he said the way water means to be wet. They walked the rest of the way in quiet. At the door to their rooms he held it open for her, the same way he had held every door since the first evening. She walked through. He followed. Outside, Verith Prime went about its morning, cleaning up, recovering, asking the questions that would take years to fully answer. Inside, 2 people sat in a quiet room and began, one honest question at a time, to know each other better. The galaxy would spend a long time talking about what happened that night. It would write reports and hold summits and revise its understanding of humanity in ways that would take a generation to fully settle. It would argue about the ship and the signal and the unit with no name and the blade that came out of nowhere in a room full of soldiers. But the thing it would never fully understand, because it had not been watching carefully enough, and because some things do not show up in reports, was the moment at the reception 4 months earlier when a plain man in a dark suit had placed himself quietly between a woman he had just met and a crowd of strangers who passed too close. He had not announced it. He had not made it a statement. He had simply done it, the way he did everything, without performance, without waiting to be asked, without needing anyone to notice. Serena had noticed. She had noticed from the beginning.